Welcome to the Smashville Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your trade addict host, Andrew Banta, joined by our analyst who swears he can predict the future, Will Ott. Get ready for armchair analysis, friendly banter, and a whole lot of fantasy fun. We are heading into week 5, having wrapped up week 4, starting to solidify the view of the season, players who we've seen either excel or do poorly, starting to draw some conclusions that they are who we thought they were or not.
That's a good throwback
hard
right
to,
there.
The windows are closing on certain buy high, sell low trade opportunities, unless situations change, of course, on teams with changing roles, trades, other players getting injured. So that makes some things challenging, especially for myself with a few players who I can pretty much write off at this point, and then other players who maybe have one really solid game in there and the rest of the games have sucked. Amari Cooper. But for my part, Zamir White is 4 bad games. I just think he's not going to be the guy for me this year too much.
I think it's more of the Las Vegas Raiders offense is just not really. I think with Josh Jacobs is a little bit more steady, more solid, more consistent. Without him, it's just too easy to plan against them, make them one-dimensional. Because if they're going to be like, 1 week we're going to just shut down the run, the other week they're going to shut down the pass. So therefore, you're going to rely on Zamir White a little bit more, rely on quarterback and maybe Devante Adams a little bit more another week. So I feel pretty happy about staying away from Las Vegas Raiders players.
As far as corrections go, you had speculated that Raheem Mostert was 30 or 31. He's actually 32, so a little bit older. And then we were both wondering where Jaden Daniels was in rookie rushing yards. We thought maybe number 1, and you had mentioned you knew some other guys that were on that list for rookie rushing yards through the first 3 games. You thought number 1 was...
As a quarterback.
As a quarterback, sorry. Yeah, you thought maybe previously Warren Moon was number 1, then maybe number 3, RG3, Robert Griffin III. I checked up on it. Jaden Daniels is now number 2 with 171 yards, still behind Robert Griffin III, who has 198 yards, but now ahead of Charlie Batch's 160 yards. Jaden Daniels did set the rookie record for completion percentage, though. Yeah, so nothing major there, but just to provide some additional insight there. As far as the matchups we had, mixing it pretty good is who you thought she was. Up there in points now, running number 1 through the first 4 games with a very high scoring matchup. You're starting to look good on that hot take you had previously.
So I want to clarify my hot take is that Sarah would not fall behind. She would maintain number 1 through number 5. I'm only going to take partial credit for this. Okay. I want to allow myself to be humbled just a little bit. I didn't get it 100%, but I'm at least partially right. So I'll be glad to take that.
Yeah, I'll give that to you. I feel like that's being a little overly critical on yourself because she's sitting good at 3-1 and top of the standings there with the 556 points for. Next closest is No Hard Feelings with 525. Rounding out the top 3, Crunchy Leaves with 409. So it's a big drop off in points after the first 2.
Yeah, and Simple Jack actually has 488, but he is 2-2.
Yeah. I moved up 1 place to 7th with points for tiebreaker there. I'm sitting at 2-2 after winning my last week's matchup.
Number 7. Where am I?
You're number 8, so you're right there too.
Hey, we're neighbors now, boys.
Yeah. You won your matchup with the Meg. It was higher scoring than I might have thought it would be. 112 to 111 roughly. That was a close game. Actually, I said 112 to 111, but I really need to go down to the decimals for this one. Because it wasn't that. It was 112.01 points to 111.84. 0.17 if I'm doing my quick math correctly. That was a tough matchup for the Meg. I'm totally biased here. Sorry, Will, but it's my wife. So I was hoping she'd get a win there because it was one of the better opportunities she had just looking at the points you scored so far this season. And it came down to the wire. She was favored for a long time in the middle of the matchups, but who ultimately pulled it out for you?
In the 1:00 games, Jordan Love started off being projected to score like 12 points. But then in the fourth quarter, Green Bay scored 22 points, and most of them were receiving touchdowns. Actually, I think they might have all been receiving touchdowns. Don't count that against me, please. But he ended up lighting it up and really put me in a position to potentially win. And that was really the game changer, even though that was before we realized it was a game changer.
Megan had Keon Coleman and Tyler Bass playing and only needed an additional like 1 point at that point, but Buffalo lost that game very badly. And I was like telling her as I'm watching that the game script is really going against her at this point, and it's looking rough because it was fourth quarter, I think, at that point when I was talking to her about it, and Buffalo's way down. They're not kicking field goals, and they even pulled Josh Allen towards the end.
But Coleman's a wide receiver, so there's a chance that he gets more points at the end of the game because they're behind so much.
If they're still trying at that point, but they forfeited in a sense, having pulled Allen, and they were running out the clock. Buffalo, as far down as they were, was actually running out the clock on the last possession. Take the
kind
loss
of playing
at
their
that
game,
point.
getting some practice
Live to
snaps.
fight another day. Don't get anyone injured unless they score on one of those earlier drives and have some Hail Mary chance. I don't even see Coleman gaining any more points. And sure enough, they didn't from the point I had said that.
I will say also that I did sync my fantasy football team rosters and scoring with my YouTube TV. So I get to watch how bad I'm doing on the big screen. That is a different kind of perspective, and it always makes me feel bad checking it.
Yeah.
So I've said I'm not going to check it anymore.
Yeah. Looking at some of the other matchups, I think this one's relevant to one of my hot takes that I messed up on last week. I predicted the No Hard Thielens and Mitchy Mitch would be the matchup with the most points so far, which would make it like 268 points. They didn't exactly get close to that, about 210 points between the pair. It was a good matchup, but it was lower scoring. Rashee Rice getting injured at the very start of that Kansas City game was a big blow.
Yeah, that was rough.
To Caitlin's team as well as to the total points. And then the Bills getting blown out so horribly, and Josh Allen fumbling, not gaining any touchdowns, and then ultimately getting pulled from the game. That kept points there at quarterback too. Other matchups of note, it was Sarah's turn again to have the highest points, 173.07 points over Simple Jack's 110. That put her right back on top of the standings with that high total, despite having two lower scoring games before this week. And then I'm very pleased to have won that game. It felt like a must win for me, beating under the radar. I feel a lot better at 2-2 than 1-3. I had a hard time predicting what players to play. Earlier in the week, it was looking like I'd have potentially 3 of my starters injured out. Kenneth Walker, Deebo Samuel, and Chris Olave were all looking at the wrong side of questionable at first. But then one by one, they started to look like they're probably going to play. That was a big deal for my points, but it made it hard for me to decide whether I should play guys like Jameson Williams, Xavier Worthy. I kept swapping them prior to certain games and being like, okay, let's plug him in as a safety net. Let's not. And then ultimately, I made a negative blow by sticking Cam Akers in there just because it was a running back that I could put in that flex spot and an earlier game. So I viewed it as an insurance policy.
Yeah.
I could deal with one injury, but if I had 2 guys out, then the way the games were timed out, I would have had to go to the waiver wire, essentially just pick up some random no-name person in the game or take a 0. So that is my self-defensive why I put in Cam Akers. I didn't expect him to get more points than Jameson Williams or Xavier Worthy, but I just couldn't stomach the chance of having multiple guys out. And I just wanted the sure points in there with an early game. I think Akers played one of the first games for me.
Especially in a matchup where you think you have a chance of actually winning the game or you should win the game. It's probably best to do that.
We'll take a 0. But man, it hurts to see, okay, I got 5.3 points from Akers. I was shooting more for 8-ish, is what was my hope. But then I see Jameson Williams got me 17 on the bench, Xavier Worthy 16.3. And then DeAndre Swift, another hot take, finally goes off and has a 22.5 point game.
Mm-hmm.
I'm 1 of 2 on the next 3 games being double-digit games. Didn't happen last week for me. Happened this week. So I need Swift to go in week 5 into the Panthers game and put a whooping on them to get me double-digit points. So my hot take is good. But
a W,
it sucks.
A W is a W.
Yeah. I mean, it sucks that I showed that faith in Swift to the extent that I made that bet. But then I panicked after last week and benched him. And finally, he has a great game. I had him starting for 3 weeks straight. And then in the 4th week, I moved him to the bench where he got me the most points. Any matchups you want to talk about, or we can move into games and stuff.
I had a problem with figuring out whether Jordan Love is going to start or not. I mentioned, I think in the last podcast, that I was going to leave Derek Carr as my starter until I have an idea of what Jordan Love's status is going to be. I did manage to have some time to actually see that Jordan Love was starting, and I just went with my gut with Jordan Love, knowing that it's a big game. It's against the Vikings. They're going to make him throw the ball a bunch. They got behind early. I felt really bad about it, especially because he threw 2 interceptions early in the game and then 1 late in the game. So when he threw the 2 early in the game, him and Derek Carr were both struggling. I think it was projected to be like 12 points versus 11 points or some really low number. And then if I would have started Derek Carr, I would have easily lost my matchup. Whereas Jordan Love ended up bouncing back, showing resilience, throwing 4 touchdowns, 3 interceptions.
It can be messy with 3 interceptions. You can have some fumbles in there as long as you're chucking the ball a lot and getting some touchdowns.
Yep. And that's why it's always nice to pick a team that's good, but not great in terms of offense. So then when your team's behind, your quarterback's going to be throwing the ball a bunch. So you pick those quarterbacks. And I feel pretty good about Jordan Love right now. Minnesota Vikings have really surprised me being now 4-0. Didn't really expect that with Sam Darnold. I was down on Justin Jefferson at the beginning when we did the actual draft.
Yeah.
And now I feel like an idiot. But that's okay. Because how many people would actually bet on Sam Darnold leading the Vikings to being 4-0?
And speaking of records, I'm finding it hard to peg who the best teams are this year. I feel like most years you have 1, maybe 2 teams that you're like, oh, these are the ones to beat. And I don't feel the same. I guess I just don't know the Vikings well enough. Maybe they are the ones. But I watched the Chiefs enough to be like, this seems like a terrible 4-0 team. The injuries obviously contribute too, but like they looked very lost the first half of their game.
They ended up winning 17-10.
Yeah, I don't know. It just seemed to me that they couldn't get anything done on offense. And I was like, how are they 4-0?
Yeah.
I'm just
they were like that last year, in my opinion.
They were
like
offensively to an extent earlier.
Yeah, they picked it up as the season went on.
That's true. That's definitely true.
Bills last year did not look good at all, in my opinion. I felt like they were almost barely a playoff team. I expected them to be easily competing there with the Kansas City Chiefs. They performed mediocrely, if that's a word. And so that was astonishing to me. I'm surprised Pittsburgh's 3-1. I'm surprised Cincinnati's only 1-3. I'm surprised by Jaguars being 0-4.
I'm surprised by that.
I'm surprised the Commanders are 3-1.
I'm also surprised there.
I'm surprised the Vikings, especially after JJ McCarthy was injured before the season started, being 4-0. I am surprised maybe the Seahawks are 3-1 and the San Francisco's 2-2.
I was going to bring up the Seahawks and say, from the games I've been able to watch, they feel like one of the stronger teams to me, even though they're not undefeated.
I'm looking preseason versus the actual season.
Like the expectations.
I feel like they're outperforming.
How hard it's been for me to peg who I think the strongest team is from what I've watched, because I saw the Chiefs and they don't feel the strongest to me. I haven't seen the Vikings, I don't think, at all this year. But the Bills didn't look very good this week. Obviously, they had weeks where they look better, but they have a game like this where they're just completely blown out. And it makes me question if they're a top contender or not. Commanders have been surprisingly good, but I don't know that I'd consider them contenders. Seahawks, I think maybe they're one of the stronger ones. Also, Ravens look pretty good. 2-2, but parts of the game I've witnessed, I'm like, okay, they look like they know what they're doing.
For 4 games into the season, they had a slow start. I mean,
but then they got
when
Henry
you lose to the Raiders.
Yeah.
As I will say, they rushed Derrick Henry for over 20 carries. He dominated the game.
And
they won.
Line graph of Henry carries versus points scored, and it's going up and to the right. And So if they just scale that up, I wonder what's the upper limit on that. Give them 50 carries a game, you'll never lose, I guess.
I guess.
I'm seeing predictions now. They're like, oh, Derrick Henry's going to go for 250 plus yards this next game.
Oh, man.
I'm like, maybe, but gosh, there's got to be a limit. What more do you want? He had 200 yards last game.
Just shy of 200.
Yeah, with Henry, Ravens are looking pretty good.
Once they realize, hey, we should probably be handing this ball off to Derrick Henry more than 20 times per game. They're 0-2 when he carries it less than 20 times, 2-0 when they're 20 or more times. So I'll just throw that out there.
Well, let's see. Other games that I watched. Hey, I like the Colts-Steelers game. That wasn't what I was expecting. The Colts had looked so bad the previous week, and then they suddenly looked super efficient with Richardson, and then unfortunately Richardson got injured. So Flacco stepped in, but he picked up right where Richardson left off in the first part of the game, and they were super efficient, moving it down the field.
I watched a little bit more of the Bears-Rams game, and even though the Bears won, I am still not very high on them. Also, when you have Cooper Kupp and Pukanuka being out for the game from the Rams side, it discredits the win in terms of what you feel like any Bears players were in terms of fantasy value. Offensively,
they weren't at full strength. Yeah.
No, and so I'm not like, if you have Matt Stafford, I'm not gonna say, hey, he sucks or he's worth dropping or anything like that. Let them be healthy. And from what I understand, those injuries are not long-term injuries. They're likely to be back in at least 2 weeks. Knowing that, I'm not going to say too much on negatively on the Rams players, even though they're 1-3. I expected them to be 2-2, but knowing there's injuries involved, 1-3 is not unreasonable.
Yeah.
It's still early in the season for them. It's still in the early season for us. I know not too long ago I was 0-2, sitting 11th, and now I am 2-2, sitting 8th, which is in the playoffs.
Yeah, last week I'd mentioned that if you were 0-3, Yahoo had an article that they said in their leagues there's a 12% chance of making the playoffs. I couldn't find anything from Yahoo on 0-4 since the Meg is sitting there, but I did use Fantasy Pros to analyze our league and give their own playoff odds on each team. And I thought I'd highlight a few of us. Seeing that the best odds currently in the league is mixing it pretty good with a 96% chance of making the playoffs, even an 8% chance of being the champion. No hard feelings right behind that with a 95% chance of the playoffs. I'm seeing fourth, 92% chance of playoffs. Having that second win instead of 1-3 helped immensely there. It gives me somehow a 13% chance of being champion, even though I'm lower playoff odds. You're seeing it projected eighth right now on playoff odds with 62% chance. It gives you a 5% chance at being champion for what it's worth. But where I wanted to really get the stat here is the Meg. 0-4, projected record is 4-10. That would be maybe even a good scenario at this point. But the playoffs odds for her are saying at 4% according to Fantasy Pros, with less than a 1% chance of being our league champion this year. What other games did you check out or have thoughts on this week? Cowboys Giants, I saw the second half. Lions Seahawks, I saw the first half. So it was just spotty what I was able to see this week. Maybe I'll just react to what you saw.
I saw the endings of many games because I believe the Rams-Bears game was on and then it ended. And then I went to CBS because there was a chance that the Packers-Vikings game was going to be the next game on CBS after the Steelers-Colts games. And then they transitioned to the incorrect game 2 times before they went to their post-game show instead of watching the rest of the Packers-Vikings game. I believe one of them was the Broncos-Jets with the, I believe, missed field goal to end the game, basically. And that wasn't really anything super interesting. I was not really impressed by any of the games that I watched, honestly.
Yeah. I don't know if it was me or the games, but my attention was waning this week for sure.
Yeah.
One game I didn't see, but wished I had, was the Commanders-Cardinals game. Because can you guess who the number one fantasy points scorer that is this year?
Jaden Daniels.
Jaden Daniels.
I'm not even 100% sober, and I knew that.
Yep, and I prefaced it with saying what game that I wished I had seen.
Yeah.
Daniels is getting it done. The Commanders as a team are much better than I thought they'd be this year. So they're competitive. Daniels can mix it up. He's not putting up crazy numbers from passing touchdowns or total yards standpoint, but his efficiency is really good for a rookie or for anyone. Like, he's been super accurate. He, through 4 games, has the highest rookie completion percentage. So even if he's not throwing for a ton of yards, he's getting enough touchdowns and running for touchdowns to be able to make a lot of fantasy points. So
Yeah,
my prediction is on track for a top 5 QB finish for him for sure.
I just can't wait until there's enough defenses that have schemed against him and understand,
Yeah.
hey, we have enough film on him. This is what he likes to do. We're going to shut this down. And then he gets exposed. But that's really most likely going to be against his divisional opponents, which are going to be the Giants. They're just not good. It's going to be against the Cowboys that have not performed to even close to expectations, and the Eagles, who have also had hiccups against beatable opponents. I like to bet against them, but at the same time, NFC East just feels like an underperforming battleground of who can be the best underperformer, and the fact that that Jaden Daniels is an overperformer in my book just means that he's going to succeed. I want to be down on him, but he has, at this point, proven me very incorrect. I think that next year will definitely be an underperforming year. I don't think he's going to have the same year next year as this year, but how does the rest of the season go this year is still going to be a question mark. We've seen some really good years from rookie quarterbacks. I have personally said, oh, they're not going to have that great of a first year, and then they've done well. So I wouldn't mind eating my words, but as long as next year doesn't really work out for him, I feel like I'm justified in my call. But I can't really make that on my hot take. Otherwise, we're gonna have to wait another year in order for
Well,
that to
yeah.
come to fruition.
I'm just happy that a draft pick that I was second guessing after I did it is actually working out really well. Do you have any takeaways from the Cowboys Giants game?
Maybe Chris was right to draft the Cowboys kicker, Aubrey.
Definitely a better pick than Tucker for this year.
I want to see the exact numbers on the season. He's got 60 points, and Chris Boswell, who was picked up by no fading on Jaden with 51.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jake Elliott, he's just not getting many opportunities at all. I didn't like what I saw from the Eagles from a kicker fantasy standpoint, in that they're going for it on fourth a lot. They're not opting to kick many field goals. So I just
The
don't think
tush
he has a
push.
very high ceiling, despite the fact that like he's projected for a higher number of points and he's higher ranked than a lot of other kickers. So I'm just trying someone else.
I think kickers are pretty disposable. Can't really feel too bad about it. Swapping in and out in the middle of the season. I believe in my other fantasy league, I'm also adding and dropping a kicker. I might be casually attempting to do that in our fantasy league.
I do that a lot as well. And I like the stretch of games coming up for Chris Boswell against Dallas, Las Vegas, and then New York. And then New York again. Jets and Giants coming up. So I like that string of games. They've not fared super well against kickers. Another one who I was debating who to get on waivers, it was going to be Chris Boswell or who No Hard Thielens ended up picking up, Chase McLaughlin, who I nearly chose instead, but I didn't like some later games in the season for him. But that string coming up, the next 4 games is pretty beautiful. Atlanta, who kickers rank first against, New Orleans, 7th rank against, Baltimore, 4th, and Atlanta again. Over the next 4 weeks looks pretty juicy for McLaughlin. So that was a decent pickup, I think, by No Hard Thielens.
Cash it in.
Yeah. Who is the Cowboys running back this year?
Well,
I'm saying that a bit facetiously.
the guy that I'm trying to pick up off of waivers,
Yeah.
he was dropped
Just
on
dropped.
waivers by Wu-Tang Financial. Rico
Yeah.
Dowdle.
Dowdle.
Yeah.
But
And
yeah,
it's
so that's your RB1 for the Cowboys. I'm cool picking up off waivers. I don't think you drop them, but I'm not super excited about the Cowboys RB1. They don't have much of a running game at all this year. Ezekiel
yeah,
Elliott's not been useful from a fantasy perspective, and Donald could be the same way for fantasy.
yeah, and it's interesting because I would have him and Ezekiel Elliott on my team. So I'd have that
Sure.
nice little handcuff. I also have the handcuff of Josh Jacobs and Emmanuel Wilson. I don't feel bad about it.
Yeah. I've got Bigsby to your ETN.
Yeah. So Andrew has proposed Xavier Worthy and Tank Bigsby for Josh Jacobs. I feel like Josh Jacobs really cashed in at the beginning of the season when Jordan Love was injured. Maybe he's not going to be the biggest deal in the world now that Jordan Love is back. I'm not against him. I still like him, but I am weak at wide receivers. Xavier Worthy, especially with Rashi Rice going down
Mhm.
with injury,
Yeah.
is now all of a sudden, hey, this is someone I feel like I need. And Tank Bigsby would be my handcuff to Travis Etienne. I'd be losing the RB1 to my handcuff of Josh Jacobs with Emmanuel Wilson.
Yeah. And to be honest, I didn't even notice that Emmanuel Wilson was on there as a handcuff to Jacobs.
I just pressed the accept button.
Did you really? Okay, awesome.
Yes.
Yeah, my thinking on that, I'd seen trade targets for the week saying buy low on Josh Jacobs, that they think a fair trade would be Xavier Worthy for Josh Jacobs one to one. They weren't low on Worthy at all, but it's just if you need help at running back, we think you can get Jacobs at a value this week. I'm going to look at his upcoming schedule real quick. I think perhaps it gets a little more favorable as well. 3 of the next 4 weeks are against teams that fare in the bottom 10 against running backs. So I'm hoping I'm getting a buy low there. I do like Worthy, but I wasn't yet confident if he was going to be an every week starter for me or if I was going to have to just find the weeks where I hope he's going to go off. I'm hoping Jacobs instead is an every week starter, which he will be for me, unless it goes much worse this season. And then Bigsby, I just picked up on waivers to try to initiate this trade with Will. He'd be a piece that Will would value, not only as a handcuff to Travis Etienne, but he has been challenging Etienne for production and carries. It's getting to be a little bit of a timeshare situation and hot hand thing, which could be a nightmare if that fully comes to fruition. Etienne's still RB1, but Bigsby's definitely impressing. So I think it's good to have him on your team if you have Etienne in case it goes south for him,
I will say
whether
that
through injury or through production.
I would likely not accept this trade if Nick Chubb weren't returning to practice this week.
Yeah.
The
Yeah. I
fact that
thought
I've
that
got
crossed my mind too.
that is a big determining factor for me willing to trade Josh Jacobs. With Nick Chubb, if he comes in and he can produce close to what Josh Jacobs is projected to put out throughout the rest of the season, then why do I need Josh Jacobs? I've got Nick Chubb. Inside my own roster, it's a 1-for-1 trade, quote unquote. So that means that either Nick Chubb or Josh Jacobs is now expendable.
I'm super excited that we did a trade on air. That's awesome. I thought
Yeah.
we might have to haggle a little bit. I didn't know if you were soured on Jacobs enough because I know you were higher on him at the beginning of the season. I thought you might say, no, I won't do Jacobs, but what will you give me for ETN? In that case, I'm like, at least I had Bigsby already. So I thought it could have gone that way too. And that'd be a little harder because I do want Jacobs more than ETN at this point. Earlier in the season, when we had discussed a similar trade, the balance was more even in my mind for them. But now ETN's, I'm a little worried about his role.
I'm also worried about Josh Jacobs' role now that Jordan Love's back. They really, I think, leaned on him and the running game
Sure.
through Jordan Love's absence. Seeing that's how they utilized him during Jordan Love's absence was not convincing to me that he was going to be a performer through the end of the season.
I told you in the notes on the trade, I was like, the numbers don't make sense for this on the Yahoo projections.
It's more of
It was a vibe.
a vibe, an emotion, a
Yeah.
love for the game.
Love for the game. I don't know which player loves the game more, but
Oh, it's about your love for the game.
oh, my love for it. Well, I do love trading. So Yahoo predicts this will help me on the season point differential by 27 points and actually hurt you by 11. I don't put much stock on that, honestly. I put forward trades where I'm actually projected negative all the time. But I know some people seem to not want to do it if it says it's negative for you. And I wasn't sure where you fell on that.
I don't have the confidence for George Kittle or Kyle Pitts to perform consistently to where I would put them as a starting role and then still benefit from them.
Yeah.
And that's where it really comes down to. Terry McLaurin has had a couple of good weeks after Daniels has learned, hey, this is how I can throw the ball versus just run the ball for fantasy points. So I was not convinced that Jane Daniels would be able to throw the ball to Terry McLaurin. I was looking to shop him after the 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I'm kind of glad that I didn't, because the last 2 weeks, I believe, have been pretty good for him when it comes to fantasy points.
I wish I'd got him from you now, because I was trying to get him as a piece in the trade. That would have worked out better. But then it was counterbalanced by ETN and Jacobs underperforming from that point in time. So I would have felt like I overpaid for them back then in week 1 or whatever.
Yeah, that's fair.
But yeah, would have liked McLaurin, though, especially after seeing the past 2 weeks for him. That trade will have a day to be reviewed, and then probably by the time we publish, it'll have gone through unless someone vetoes it. But I don't think there's any reason.
I don't see a reason.
Other than the commissioner is going to veto, because he said he vetoes every one of my trades because he wants to.
I believe he said he vetoes any one of your trades with Meg.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Because there's a potential conflict of interest.
Serious allegation, Chris. I'm not sure I like what you're insinuating.
I will say that on waivers, I'm trying to pick up Rico from the Dallas Cowboys RB1. I'm planning on dropping Darius Slayton. I'm hoping that works for me. And now we have that trade going through. So those are really my roster changes. Oh, and I also did drop Matt Prater for Austin Siebert, the Arizona kicker for the Washington kicker. He had more points on the season, and that's about it.
Yeah, the waiver pickups this year haven't been super exciting. There hasn't been one that's just consistently at this point. Juwan Jennings had a great game and everything, and was a good pickup for Chris. But I can't say for sure if that's a season-changing waiver wire pickup. I can't think of any running backs would be definite starters now. I feel like most seasons that happens through injury or something, but I guess all the most important handcuffs were already drafted, and I don't think anyone picked up one that's just taken over a lead role.
I could see someone picking up Joe Flacco. Anthony Richardson was out with a concussion or hip injury.
Hip. He's already limited at practice, so he's trending in a good direction, at least getting a limited practice in.
All right, which case then I retract my statement of picking up possibly Joe Flacco if you're possibly thinking about a new quarterback.
There's still some options out there. Like Trevor Lawrence hasn't been that good, but I think you could plug him in for a bye week if you had to.
I've already dropped him. So don't worry about it. If I've dropped him, he's not worth it.
Okay. Yeah, Caleb Williams is trending in a positive direction. I know you're not a believer, but the past 2 weeks have been positive performances for fantasy.
He had a really good week. I think he had the really good week last week. I don't expect that to be continuing. To me, his stock is still below purchase value. Why would you buy a stock at $10 if you're expecting $20?
Yeah.
And you are pretty sure that it's not going to reach 20. He might be worth something where you have an extra slot because someone's on the pup list or IR, and you now have an extra roster slot, so you can squeeze someone in there. Maybe then he'd be worth it, but if you're not really looking in that direction, I wouldn't bother.
Kirk Cousins, Justin Herbert, also available on waivers here.
I feel bad for Justin Herbert.
Yeah, in what way?
He was thrown to Keenan Allen, and now he's thrown to Joshua Palmer as his wide receiver 1.
Yeah.
Nothing against Joshua Palmer, but he's no Keenan Allen.
Should I do awards?
Yeah, go for it. Do it.
Okay. I might need your help on this one, because as we were talking about the waiver wire pickups, there haven't been too many game-changing ones, and I feel like that was even more the case this week. For my waiver wire wizard nominees, I'm having trouble coming up with some good ones. Looking at people who did okay production and maybe have an okay outlook, I picked up Rashawn Johnson. He's looked better in the 2 games he's played at times than DeAndre Swift even. But Swift at least had a good game last game, so maybe Johnson's not going to potentially usurp him like a lot of people were thinking after game 3. So I don't know that'll be too influential of a pick on my season going forward. Under the radar, picked up Aaron Rodgers. He's looked good in some games, but I'm not either too excited or down on that pickup. The Meg picked up Trey Tucker, dropping running back Corum. Point-wise, that really paid off for her this week. It was almost the difference in the game with you, but you pulled out the win. But Trey definitely gave her a better point differential there. And then best year around, picked up DeAndre Hopkins. Hopkins hasn't done that well this year, but I still like at least having the option to put in a guy that has historically been great, could turn around for him this season. So I like that one. But I'm having a tough time choosing a winner.
We don't have to. We're going to say, you know what? They were all mediocre. They're not really a wizard.
winner.
You have
None of us
to
earned
be
it.
a wizard.
Okay, fair.
You have to be something like remarkable, or
Yeah.
I found the diamond in the rough. I think those are all reasonable, but not necessarily game changing.
Yeah.
They're not wizardry. It's more of just, I should probably make a move.
All right. All of us are just muggles this week. As for bench blunder nominees, I'm going to award one, but I might need to talk through with you to figure out who. I feel like most of them at least had an explanation, like you could defend yourself on the substitution. I feel really bad about starting Cam Akers over almost anyone. But as I talked about earlier, the timing of certain questionable starters worked out better, that I just wanted to take the certainty and making sure that I didn't have injuries I couldn't cover because of the kickoff times of certain games for people like Swift and especially Jameson Williams and Xavier Worthy, and they all had much bigger games. Under the radar, left Taysom Hill on the bench instead of Mike Gesicki. Gesicki's not a guy I want to be in my starting lineup, so I almost want to just see rolling the dice on Hill on this week, given that there wasn't a great option. I'm not saying that Hill's a guy that should normally be starting, but if I'm going to roll the dice, I might like the wildly variable point totals that he could provide.
4.4 points. Sorry, I should say 4.44 points. Rolls eyes. Anyway, he ended up with negative 0.9. When you get below 5 fantasy points, I think at that point it's worth really throwing someone else out there that can potentially get a bunch of points. That's where, hey, you know what? As a tight end, he might catch a touchdown in a goal line situation. He might come in a wildcat formation and then score a touchdown on a run play. He might be in the wildcat, but in the more of a passing style situation where he throws a touchdown. I personally would probably take Taysom Hill. I agree. It's a solid nominee. I like that.
I've listed Mike multiple times this year, but I've also listed myself multiple times this year. So I just want to let him know I'm not trying to pick on him with this. I'm definitely also a nominee having Cam Akers in, and I have a defense of it too. And I'm sure you have a defense of your player. Another one that I thought maybe there's just relying on recency bias for performances was Wu-Tang Financial having Quentin Johnston in at flex over guys like Brian Thomas Jr. and Rico Dowdle, who is now dropped. I could have definitely made an argument and feel like I had better than 50-50 odds of putting them in over Quentin Johnston at the flex spot, given that was a wide receiver running back flex.
That's tough because it's hard when the quarterback has all mediocre options, because then all of a sudden everyone's an option as the wide receiver. And I feel like that's what Justin Herbert's situation is over in Los Angeles as a part of the Chargers. It's hard to really monitor or figure out, hey, this is who I should be going for. I feel like Jacksonville has had a pretty rough time in the quarterback position. I'm okay with the nomination, but at the same time, it's hard for me to say I agree with that.
What about over Tyler Lockett instead?
Oh, I would probably put Tyler Lockett over either of them, especially with the way that the Seahawks have been playing. And to be fair, Brian Thomas Jr. has put in 10.7, 10.4, 4.8 coming into this last week. and then scoring 50.9 last week. After you get like 2 of 3, you say, I'm going to go with a strong hand. I feel like the first 2, maybe even 3 weeks, you say, I'm going to go off of last year's information or kind of off of a hunch. But after 3 games, I would be a little bit more inclined to say, I'm going to give the benefit to the person that scored more points. I think Brian Thomas would be a reasonable one. I would probably have been skeptical of exactly what he'd be able to do this week. And I'll just leave it at that.
I'm not super strong conviction in the nominations, but the last one I wrote down as I was looking at the results of the matchups was you benching George Kittle again for Kyle Pitts. I've been after you twice for this, William, when are you going to start George Kittle?
I don't know, man. I feel like I start the wrong one every time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tough place to be in when you're just like coin flipping and it's coming up wrong each week.
Yeah, there. Because the problem is that with the tight ends, they tend to be either feast or famine. And I honestly feel like that there's been too much famine. 4 points, 13 points, 6 points, 0 points for George Kittle coming into this week. I almost felt like they forgot about him, that he exists.
Was he injured for the 0 point day?
Yeah, I don't think he was in, now that you mention it. I think part of the question I had to myself, was he going to be fully healthy or healthy enough to be a contributing or key factor in the game? And even then, it was a big question mark. The big key play that he had was a touchdown reception. I did not actually watch it, but I did read some articles on the idea behind the play call. George Kittle was surprised that there was a play call for him to receive the ball into possibly double coverage, and it ended up being, I think, double or triple coverage, and having to basically, quote unquote, Randy Moss 3 New England defensive backs to be able to catch that touchdown. Without that play, I think he was nothing.
Week 3, he was declared out before the game versus the Rams. So that's why he's got 0 points there. I don't know, Will. What do you think? Who should be our bench blunder of the week? I don't have one that stands out to me more than the others.
Man, I think Boutique Financial, you were saying he had Quinn Johnson in instead of Johnston.
You didn't mind that, though, right?
Part of it, too, is going off of the skepticism of what a 4-point person would have. So that removes Mikey from the situation. And then also with George Kittle being out the previous week with injury, also I feel like excludes him to a degree. He was, I think, questionable running into this week. So his ability to contribute was, again, questionable. So I think that kind of leaves only really one reasonable option.
It could be me.
I don't think it. I would love to smack talk you.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. I love to smack talk you, but I don't really feel like that's really enough to really say.
I felt like I played it too safe because the guys were trending like they were all going to play, but I was like, oh, they still have questionable tags. If 2 of 3 are out, I'm screwed. I don't feel that strong about Cam Akers now, especially with Joe Mixon coming back. But okay, if you want to award it to Wu-Tang Financial this week,
I will do it with an asterisk of saying there was no better option.
That's good. No one's being completely irresponsible with their pitches, I guess.
Yeah, no.
Do you want to do the hot takes? Want to do the thing?
The thing. Oh my gosh.
Where we make completely random guesses and see if we can take heads or tails.
Oh man.
Oh, I'll bring up that your one from week 3 did not come to fruition.
What was the week 3 one?
You said that Joe Burrow would have at least 2 touchdowns and 300 yards. He got the 2 touchdowns, but only 232 yards. Didn't get that one. I didn't get mine with the highest points in the season total with No Hard Thielens and Mitchie Mitch. But my Jaden Daniels prediction for the entire season is going well. What can we guess wrong next week?
That's a real good question. Do you have one that stands out for you?
I do. I have 2, a kind of short-term one and a long-term one. In the short-term, I'm looking at how bad this Patriots-Dolphins game is going to be. The over-under on it is 35.5 points, and I'm going to take the under on that. They have struggled so much to get touchdowns. With Jacoby Brissett at quarterback, the Patriots have averaged just 13 points and 238 yards a game. The Dolphins are averaging 11.3 points. Each team has 4 touchdowns through 4 games, and that's even skewed to the positive since the Dolphins have no touchdowns since when Tua was healthy. And the Patriots only have one in the past 2 weeks. So I'm going to say that I'll take the under on the 35.5 points between the two of them, and I'll only give them 1 touchdown combined.
Oh, man.
I'm making it rough on myself trying to be so specific, but just one touchdown is my guess.
So according to Andrew, if you have a Dolphins or a Patriots player, you should not be starting them this week.
I'm streaming Patriots defense just because I don't think the Dolphins are going to do anything.
I feel like, so my hot take is that Aaron Rodgers will not play in the fourth quarter, or will exit in the fourth quarter, meaning that they're going to be behind enough to where they're going to bench Aaron Rodgers and let the next player play.
And who are they against this week?
That's like cheating to ask me that question.
How's it cheating?
They're against Minnesota.
Oh, okay. You couldn't remember. Okay.
Yeah, I couldn't remember. I feel like Minnesota's going to really just dominate the offensive side of the ball to where Aaron Rodgers is not going to be able to keep up, and therefore they're going to say, you know what, we're going to preserve our QB1. We're going to let someone else play at some point in the fourth quarter.
It'll be like the Bills this week.
Yeah.
Allen said.
Yeah, he's not going to be worth starting. Mikey P has Aaron Rodgers, and he also has Taysom Hill as a quarterback, and Anthony Richardson. I would honestly start Anthony Richardson. I know he's had some struggle. He's had some struggles, but you know what, Mike, start Anthony Richardson. I love to smack on Bears fans because I'm a Packers fan. I also love to smack on Colts fans because we live in Indiana, and I love to give them a dose of reality. But you know what? Start Anthony Richardson, please. If you want to win, please start Anthony Richardson.
Yeah. If you got Patrick Mahomes, is he still an every week starter, or do you need to have a pretty solid streaming backup to use on positive matchups?
I think you have to have a good backup to start him. Patrick Mahomes is going to give you consistent points.
Yeah.
Is he going to be the best option? Maybe not. But at the same time, I very much doubt that he's ever going to score you 15 points in a game or less. He's going to score you 15 or more, most likely 18 or more in a game. And at that point, you know what? It's worth keeping him. It's worth starting him.
I am worried about who he has to throw to. Losing Rashee Rice, Hollywood Brown earlier in the season, and then your running game's hurting with Pacheco out. He's got Xavier Worthy, and that could be good for you now.
And there's some discussion that they might possibly add Devante Adams.
Oh, is there really?
Yes, there's discussion on ESPN. They've done a reality check on exactly where Devante Adams might end up.
Yeah, I had heard more of the Jets.
He has officially asked for a trade. Before it was he might get traded. Now he's, hey, I would like to be traded. Depending on what his personal goals are, I feel like Kansas City is the best place because Patrick Mahomes plus Devante Adams plus Xavier Worthy is still very much a Super Bowl contender.
Yeah.
Whereas Xavier Worthy as your wide receiver 1, no offense against Xavier Worthy, I have faith in him because I accepted the trade. But at the same time, I don't think that's really enough with Travis Kelce to become an offensive powerhouse or a threat enough to where we say we're going to deny the run and then just play the pass, to where we make sure we stop the run. And if they try to pass to Xavier Worthy or Travis Kelce, those are their main 2 targets. They're not really going to really bother with anyone else. I think the Chiefs are a reasonable landing spot for Devante Adams, and that scenario would be mind-boggling.
Yeah, that would change my second hot take here if they have Devante Adams. But right now, I'm thinking that Mahomes is going to be pretty middling this season, given the slow start even before the injuries and then the injuries compounding over it. I bet he finishes as a double-digit fantasy QB, so outside the top 9 at least. I'm going to say not necessarily outside the top 10 because I could really see him falling right there at 10, and I don't want to go that far. But yeah, I think he'll be in the double digits. Right now, he's 16th. And while they do have a history of getting better as the year goes on, he's fighting against the injuries to his wide receivers. He finished 2022 as number 1 QB and 23 as the number 8. So this would be continuing a downward trend for him if that did come to pass.
And that's one of the reasons why I believe that Devante Adams is destined to go to Kansas City.
That would be awesome. And if that happened, I'd want to retract the prediction. I think that alone could be a net negative impact.
We're gonna create a little asterisk.
Your
take to say if Devante Adams does not go to Kansas City, then
sure, why not? I can make it that specific because it only helps me. So yeah, this is all assuming Devante Adams does not go there, which is new information to me that it could happen.
To be fair, the article that I read had, I think, 6 different teams where Devante Adams could go to. That included the Jets, the Packers, the Bills, the Chiefs, and don't remember the other ones. But those are the ones that were interesting to me to see. Especially the big thing was that Rashee Rice going down. It sounds like to me that he's going to be missing enough time to where Kansas City wants to make a move.
Yeah, that'd be really interesting.
I think we are good to close out. If you notice any errors, please let us know. We are very happy to accept humility in our lives amongst casual sports fans.
We'll kick off week 5. Get out there, make those waiver wire claims. Send me your trade offers. Do it.
That's it for this episode of the Smashville Fantasy Football Podcast. As always, we have aspirations of adequacy, so come back and we'll try to do a bit better next time. Who knows, we may even reveal that one sneaky trick guaranteed to win your fantasy league. But until then, keep those trades rolling and get your lineup set before kickoff. See you next week.